We are back with Richard Slatin. He is a custody evaluator and family assessor. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
So interesting job. Obviously, you decide if people should be able to keep their children, and you try to help the families. You decide whether the families are functioning or something like that. It seems rather complicated, Richard.
Well, actually, it's sometimes complicated. Sometimes it's quite easy. I find that when I'm interviewing the families and the children, if you want to know what's really going on, ask the children.
Ah, yes. I was just talking about the Emperor's New Clothes yesterday, and it's kind of the same thing. All the adults are going, "Oh, don't you love his outfit?" And here's the Emperor's naked. And then one child says, "He's not wearing any clothes." You know, sometimes it's the children who will be honest with you. They've not been taught not to be honest with you, kind of a thing.
That's
Plus,
very true.
Their perception may be different than their parents, I suppose, too.
That's very true. And since this is a child-focused process and a child-focused situation, the important thing to do is understand the impact whatever is decided will have upon the children. Then you work for the best for the child's best outcome.
Yeah, right. Now, you were an author of a book called Who Can I Love? This is sort of about kids, too. It is. Very much
It is.
children.
I wrote that in 2008. I've got another book coming out last year. But this first book dealt with what we refer to as displacement, when the children are confused because step-parents will come in or new partners of their separated parents will come into the family, and they feel guilty about who to love, and is it okay to love this one or love that one? And they're always worried about pleasing their parents or hurting their parents' feelings.
Oh, it's all complicated, and this is what you deal with. Well, we wanted to talk today about protecting children from high conflict, divorced, never married co-parents.
Yes.
Okay, now I think that's interesting. Why is that important to protect them from high conflict, divorced, or never married co-parents?
Well, the reason that it's important is that studies were done in 2007 that showed that children raised in high conflict situations, which means parents who are now separated by divorce or they were never married, and there's constantly orders of protection and police and yelling and screaming, and the children know that mommy and daddy don't like each other, and they're caught in the middle. The long-term and short-term health risks were very high. For instance, they found that children raised in those situations are at risk for depression, anxiety, harm to self, which is what children do when they start cutting themselves to release that emotional pain. And not only that, but it also can create what we unfortunately refer to as the legacy or the gift that keeps on giving. They parent this way because that's what they learn. And we all grow up and we all act much as we experience when we're very young.
So it's passed on. I mean, it's almost like a hereditary thing, like child abuse.
Like child abuse.
You know, which is so hard to imagine when a child is in a bad situation, they're uncomfortable, they're unhappy, and yet inadvertently, possibly, they repeat that same pattern.
Yes, very much so.
So if they have these risks that aren't changed, you know, you mentioned these depression, anxiety, so tell me a little bit about that kind of thing and how you change those things. Because if they are depressed and they have anxiety from these situations, self-harming, substance, alcohol abuse, you know, how do you change that?
Well, the important thing to do is recognize the co-parenting dynamic. That's what we call the parents that are no longer together. They still are co-parents for their children. And once that dynamic is recognized they're constantly fighting, they're constantly filing papers in court, police are coming out, and so forth. Once they've been identified as that, that's where the focus is. The focus is on getting them to change because they were often raised like that, and that's what they know. So the first thing to do is shift their focus from it being all about themselves to being about the children. So they learn to put the children first in that situation. And that's the first third of this 8-week program. And secondly, no one takes a conflict resolution class in high school. No one learns how to resolve conflict, and that can be as easy as two friends showing up at the movie theater, both wanting to see a movie at 4, but they want something different. Right. And how that gets resolved. So what we do is we teach them the skill set over about 4 to 6 weeks, And then the final part of the program is where they practice, practice, practice. Because in that way, some of those old habits, some of those damaging habits of the children, that's the best prospect for change.
So tell me some of the, I mean, of course you mentioned an easy practice one, you know, two friends go to a movie and that kind of thing, but what about these really, you know, larger high conflict things? How do you, what kinds of things cause real high conflict and grief in a family that way?
Well, one of the things that cause that is when parents repartner. You may have people who haven't gotten over their divorce or over their separation. So you may have jealousy, you may have anger, you may have bitterness, and all those are at play. And the children are aware of everything. They're aware of every nuance, every change in the parent's behavior. They begin to dread the time that's coming where they're going to be exchanged from one parent to another. And the parents often misread that as thinking that the child doesn't want to go with the other parent, when actually it's the child's anticipation of a very high conflict, tense situation.
Between the parents.
Between the parents when they meet to exchange. One of the things we do is focus on their communication. For parents that can't talk over the phone without getting off track and getting back into fighting the old battles, we establish an email protocol, a way in which they email each other and they treat each other like business partners. This is actually referred to as a parenting business model, where they stay on track, where they stick to one topic at a time, and there's a time of response. They have to respond within so many hours, and how that's managed. And then we train the parents by teaching them the model step by step. They, of course, do examples. And then every now and then I'll be emailed something from the students, and I change all the identifiers in it, of course, and then I use it in the class, such as, okay, now this section of the communication, is this appropriate or not? Yes, this is appropriate, because they're asking about the child. Okay, and we go on to paragraph by paragraph, and then we get into something like, and that's the way you've always been, and you're just trying to take control, and I let the parents vote on whether that's appropriate or not. So we use real world examples.
So then they can see it. I mean, obviously, they do this, I guess, automatically. They're angry, they're upset, they're hurt, whatever, and so they're using, you know, this against, even people using their children against the other person. Don't you see that a lot in these situations where, I mean, it's almost like one parent is unaware of the effects of poisoning the waters, so to speak, about the other parent with their children. I mean, they're hurting their children to get back at the other ex-partner.
You know, that's a good point that you make. But what it is, it's not that they're unaware, because you can tell them all day long what you're really doing is this. The problem is that they are more centered on their own grief, on their own anger, and we have to teach them how to shift that focus from themselves to the child. So it's always, always, always putting the children first. We even have them put a picture of their child in their workbook. And we have workbooks that go along with this program. They do homework to reinforce the lessons from week to week. And the feedback we've been getting is very, very positive. And we keep on. We started this as a 6 or 8 week program, and it's been running for almost a year now.
That's great. Now,
every 8 weeks.
You work with the courts, I know a lot,
yes,
Richard.
I do.
Now, are these court-ordered programs for parents, or are these voluntary things parents do to, you know, to take this course?
Well, that's also a good point. I think if it was voluntary, I would be talking to an empty room. But the parties are court-ordered. And whenever possible, I try to have both parties in the same class. Certain rules apply, such as separated parents can't sit together, talk to each other, look at each other, and don't bring up anything that's going to address the other parent. But then they learn what each other is learning. And that has been found to be very helpful. So when they're in the same class, they're exposed to the same material.
So then they have a common ground to come from to build this bridge of understanding kind of a thing, I guess. Because, yeah, if somebody's getting some skills and the other person doesn't, there's still this communication barrier. I suppose. Do you see a lot of changes? What kinds of things do you see in these parents who've had volatile relationships possibly, and they're damaging their children knowingly or unknowingly through the high conflict?
Well, the highly volatile, the really high conflict cases, one of the things we see first and best is it cuts off all the bad communication. They are taught to adhere to the email model, which is a business model, just like business partners who don't get along. The business is raising the children. So they're able to communicate, and they're able to do so without getting, as we call, off track or coloring outside the lines.
Nice. So you're diffusing that situation, and you're seeing things change for families, I guess, through this so far?
We're more than diffusing it, we're keeping it from happening. Oh. And once it happens, it takes them down that dark path.
And it escalates.
And it escalates. So the trick is to catch them before that happens and to retrain how they approach, to retrain how they think, and to retrain the outcome.
Okay, well, what about parents who might want to take this class who aren't court ordered? I mean, are there parents who say, gosh, we've got a problem, we need help? Do you see that at all?
I do sometimes, and for those parents, there's no charge for them. All they have to do is contact me, but they would have to commit to the entire 8-week program. But the program that is court ordered, it's been made to be very inexpensive. It's $20 a class, and then the workbook is $30. So, and they pay as they go, so it's not a question of I can't afford to or my paycheck hasn't come.
Well, healthy, happy families and children, future generations, certainly worth that. Richard Slatin, very enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Information on the screen for folks who might want to check into that.
Thank you for having me, Sandy.
Don't go away, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to find out how to dress a woman for success and who does that. Makeovers. We'll be right back.